I'm on no sleep. No sleep. You don't know what it's like in there. All night long, things are creaking and cracking, and that red light is burning my brain.
You look a little stressed.
Oh, I'm stressed.
It's not the load that breaks you. It's the way you carry it. Beautiful words from the beautiful and lovely Miss Lena Horne. I was sitting back trying to figure out, I got this new podcast, which subject or topic should I lead with first? And given everything that's going on in society now, it kind of just made sense to talk about the thing that we don't talk about enough. And that's stress. You go through it. I go through it. Some people have a more abundant reservoir of emotional resilience than others. Others don't handle stress very well at all. But we all have to deal with it, at least if you're in touch with reality. But we rarely have conversations with each other about it. And even more alarmingly, we probably rarely have conversations with ourselves about stress. How many times has somebody asked you, how are you doing? How you feeling? How you been? And without really assessing, you greet back, I'm fine. I'm good. How are you? And then the cycle begins. They'll say they're fine. They'll say they're good. But are we really? I was looking at the annual survey from the American Psychological Association. They conducted this survey in October of 2020, or published the survey in October 2020. And it says nearly 8 in 10 adults say the coronavirus pandemic is a significant source of stress in their life. And 2 out of 3 adults say they've experienced increased stress over the course of the pandemic. That is a very high number. That is most of us. 1 out of 5 adults say their mental health is worse now than it was the previous year. Not surprising. Stress comes in many, many different forms. But for the purpose of keeping things a little bit consolidated, let's just say most stress falls underneath 4 categories. So you have acute stress, chronic stress, eustress, and distress. Acute stress is mainly going to be tied to a singular event. Something that just happened. Maybe you just got into a heated argument. Maybe you got into a exchange with somebody physically where you had to actually throw blows or something like that. Maybe you got burglarized, sudden loss of a family member or a loved one. That is going to trigger you at that moment. Your adrenaline gets going, that cortisol gets flowing, your heart rate is up, you're amped up, and your body is going into fight or flight mode because it recognizes a perceived threat and it wants it eliminated so it can go back to normal. Usually when you have an episode of acute stress, it takes about 90 minutes for everything to settle back down, heart rate return back to normal, and you can conduct yourself as you was before the event even happened. Usually when somebody goes through acute stress, frequently, it can have some very adverse effects down the line. If it goes on for, not a long period of time, but somewhat extended period of time. You can start to see the inability to remember the triggering event. Some people suffer from flashbacks. You might get avoidant behavior, anxiety, irritability, in some cases insomnia. Acute stress is something that we all have to deal with. Chronic stress, that's the killer. So chronic stress is something that you have to endure over an extended period of time. Maybe you grew up in poverty. Maybe you grew up in a war-torn country, an abusive relationship or a household, something of that sort. We're talking about years and years and decades of just stress piling up on you. That can lead to some very adverse health effects down the line. We're talking about heart disease, extreme weight loss and gain, anxiety disorders, memory disorders, depression, digestive disorders, low self-esteem, frequent headaches, feeling of helplessness or not being in control, insomnia. Chronic stress is something that usually affects people who are on the margins way more than people who aren't on the margins. And given everything that's going on with us being in a pandemic, I would imagine that all that stress is probably going to be compounded even more than usual. But you also have distress. That's the stress of your daily life. Financial problems, having problems with your career. Maybe you're going through a divorce. Maybe you're going through a punishment of some sort. Maybe you sustained a bad injury. So maybe not as terrible as chronic stress, but it's still a real thing. But then you have your good stress. Eustress. It's the stress of your daily life that has a positive effect. Maybe you got engaged and you're getting excited to be married, start a family. Maybe you received a promotion at your job. Maybe you got a little baby on the way. You won some money. You made a new friend. You just graduated college. You got that degree that you was studying for. With all different types of stresses, though, as your stress level goes up, your productivity actually goes up too. So I want to make it well known that not all stress is bad. If you are experiencing stress, you are experiencing reality. And that is your mind telling you, hey, I am perceiving something that is not regular. What is this? And what are we going to do about it? So if it's good, you keep it going. If it's negative, then we need to find a way to eliminate that from our lives so we can go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So I'm fascinated to try to start the conversation about how we can have a better relationship and understanding with stress. So as we live our lives going forward, we can be in a better mind frame when it comes to stress management. So I had to reach out to the pros. Why? Because in the famous words of my guy Eugene from The Walking Dead, I am not a scientist, and nor am I a doctor. So I did what any other podcaster would do. I reached out to one. And I reached out with the hope that we can get a better understanding about stress management, and how we can change our lives to be more in control. So I welcome in Dr. Latoya Gaines. Dr. Latoya Gaines is a clinical psychologist with years of experience treating children, adolescents, and adults. Dr. Gaines received her master's and doctorate in clinical psychology with a multicultural concentration from the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology at Rutgers University. She did her clinical internship and postdoctorate at Yale School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. Throughout her training and career, Dr. Gaines has worked in a variety of settings, including Patterson Public Schools, the Rutgers Foster Care Counseling Project, The Haven, which is a school-based mental health program, Rutgers Psychological Service Clinic, Newark Beth Israel Hospital Regional Diagnostic Treatment Center, West Haven Mental Health Clinic, Fordham University Counseling and Psychology Services, and Rutgers Newark Counseling Center. And if that wasn't boss enough, in 2019, she opened up a practice called Culture of Wellness, LLC, which provides individuals, couples, and family counseling as well as psychological assessment to children, adolescents, and adults. She also provides mental health and consultation services to local school districts. So you've worked everywhere except Wakanda.
Yeah.
You've been around.
Listen, if I could, I would.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool too. So yeah, you're out there, you're talking to people.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure you're hearing a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And me doing this first episode, talking about stress really kind of made sense, especially coming out of 2020. But I kind of feel like we've had this thing that we've been kind of trying to tell ourselves as a society, like all we got to do is get out of 2020, get to 2021. But we still have to recognize that we're still living in a pandemic. So, of course, living in a pandemic, there's going to be a lot of high levels of stress. What kind of impact do you think the pandemic is having on mental health as a general population is concerned?
Yeah, so I think that, this is something that nobody saw coming, right? Very unexpected, unclear about when this is going to be over. So much information hitting us, so much conflicting information hitting us. And so I think it's really difficult to go from a situation where, I mean, life is unpredictable anyway, right? But I think that for the most part, people feel good about having routines and a sense of knowing typically what your day is going to be like each day. But then having that sort of taken away from you and having to shift and sort of abandon all of the normal things that we used to do to be, mindful of being socially distant and being mindful of, wearing masks and just now working from home, a lot of us, and it's a lot of control that we've had to give up. And so I think a lot of the issues that are going on are having to just adjust to something that was very sudden, very abrupt, and nobody can tell us where the end is going to be. I think on the news we hear approximate, maybe by this time, if these conditions are met, but nobody really knows. And so I think it's difficult for us to all have to adjust to something that we don't even know when it's going to be over.
Yeah. So. And speaking of adjusting, I'm pretty sure once you were, made your mind up that you was going to go into this field and become a psychologist, I'm pretty sure you weren't expecting to be a psychologist in a pandemic. How has it affected you personally?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm just like everybody else, I'm human first before a therapist. And so I've had to also check myself and make sure that I'm doing all the things that I also recommend to my clients, right? In terms of focusing on the things that I can control and making sure that I am creating new routines for myself in terms of what makes sense, making sure I'm getting proper exercise, making sure I'm continuing to reach out to family and friends and not be isolated, and maintain self-care.
Yeah.
I mean, those are really the things that I'm talking to my clients about every week. And so, I also have to practice what I preach too.
As far as being in a pandemic, obviously we started off last year with the death of, Kobe Bryant, and we had Chadwick Boseman pass. And then going through the pandemic as it got into its height, I guess around maybe the summertime, starting in March, going through the summertime, people's lives were being upended. People losing businesses and people losing family members, just not being able to stay in contact with loved ones the way they normally would operate. Obviously, that brings on a lot of challenges for your life. And with challenges and adversity, of course, you're going to have a ton of stress.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I wanted to start my podcast off, talking about stress, because it's something I guess maybe I always referred to it as the real silent killer, because especially in the communities of color, we don't really talk about mental health amongst us that well, maybe due to conditioning or whatever like that. But stress, it fascinates me because it can have such, terrible ramifications down the line, but we don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis and the damage that it can be doing. So talk to me a little bit about what are some of the signs that somebody might see in themselves or exhibit if you're an outside person looking at someone else that you say, you know what, stress may be an issue that you're dealing with.
Yeah. So I think what I want to do first, if that's okay, is to just normalize stress. Right. A baseline stress is not something that is typically seen as bad because it's a normal response to a difficult situation.
Right.
We all have things that, make us feel overwhelmed, whether that's something at your job or relationship issues or family stuff. Stress is a real response to a difficult situation. And so it kind of prepares us to deal with whatever that situation is. So, I don't want people to think that, a stress response to a difficult situation is necessarily bad. However, if the situation is prolonged, it's not going away. Typically, when we think of stress, we think of it as just the one incident that's happening. Maybe you have a deadline at work, you have to meet it. Once you meet it, stress levels go down because the event is over. But dealing in a situation like this with a pandemic, right, that's ongoing,
right,
we can start to see stress responses, including, difficulty sleeping, change in eating habits, lack of exercise, feeling really irritable. Typically, the things that you may have some patience for, maybe you don't have such patience for anymore. Are you not engaging in things that you normally would? So if you are somebody who exercises pretty regularly, and now you're not really doing that because, your mind is racing, can't get yourself to go to the gym, all you're focused on is what's happening, racing thoughts, things like that, yes. And then that could be something that we want to get under control, right? Especially if it's something that is a change from how you typically are. And everybody responds differently to stress. Some of us cope really well, and some of us, maybe not so great. So I think if you're noticing patterns of behavior that are different, including the things that I just mentioned, then you may want to think about, okay, how am I really dealing with this?
I was listening to you guys' podcast, and it's very interesting to even seeing the cover art where it's talking about normalizing the conversation about mental health and, talking about stress and anxiety and depression and things of that nature. And you guys on your podcast make it very entertaining in a sense of where it feels like a safe space as a listener that would eventually open up doors to, after listening to that episode, maybe I will go talk to my significant other or friend about it when I wasn't comfortable before. But especially being in a pandemic, I'm thinking about communities of color. I'm thinking about disenfranchised communities and how whenever something goes bad, normally those people are affected the worst because they're close to the edge, so they get pushed off first. But being that we have a hard time talking about, mental health in general, how do you better, I guess, make someone that you might suspect be having issues? How do you make them more comfortable to talk about it? How do you create that environment for them?
Yeah, so safety is key, right? And part of that safety is knowing. So if you're in a situation with a friend you think may need to talk to somebody, part of safety is, maybe you engage them, but then if you get the sense that they're really not trying to hear it at that point in time, then you don't push the issue, right? And maybe you suggest other things that they can do if they're not quite ready. Maybe you suggest like, oh, this Instagram account gives like really good information. Maybe you should check this out. Or I listened to this podcast and they were giving really good information. Maybe you should check it out, because I think, the message has been passed down in communities of color about, therapy is for crazy people, or you don't typically share your business outside of the family, and so going to talk to a stranger about these things that are really, really difficult can be a little overwhelming. And so maybe you start out small by just suggesting that they look into some information about what it is that they're experiencing. And then, exposure can then lead to saying, what, these are some things that I'm having some trouble with. Maybe they might come back to you and say, I looked at that and it resonated with me. And so you don't really want to push it, but maybe just offer some suggestions that maybe they can do on their own in the privacy of, wherever they're in their own space at their own time. And then, hopefully from there, then they may see a need for it. But if not, then just being there and letting people know that you're here, no matter what, whether they're ready at this point or maybe some point down in the future, just letting somebody know that you're there, I think is enough.
I kind of feel like, having avenues like, your podcast and my podcast, and like you said, those Instagram pages and some good Facebook Facebook groups out there. It's kind of I think we are doing a work to normalize it a little bit. But one thing I was curious about is especially when it comes to stress, which this episode is about.
Yeah.
Often the ones that are forgotten about are the children. My son, who was, National Honor Society, doing great in school and a very, charismatic and ball of energy. And it seemed like last year hit him very, very rough. And I think it's kind of bleeding over into his studies. You're starting to see bad marks that you don't normally see. And it's kind of been a shock to me. So we often forget about them because we also look at them like, they're happy, they're good. They don't know how to explain if they're feeling a certain type of way that may be, more than just sad. How do we keep the little ones, how do we keep our eye on them and start looking for little clues that say, you know what, something is out of the ordinary here?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think we do tend to overlook the children. Kids are naturally resilient, right? And so I think a lot of times we kind of take for granted that they'll bounce back.
Right.
So I think the things that I'm glad that you noticed is that there was a change, right? Your son used to be on honor roll and now things are not really the same. And so that's a significant change. And so I think as parents, we want to pay attention to those things that we're noticing are not, typical for our kids, and then open up the conversation. Because just as much as it's hard for us to adjust, I mean, children, a lot of school is social. A lot of school is social. And so, we emphasize the academics 100%, but, social and emotional learning is just as important growing up. And so to have that part of your life put on pause for such an extended period of time, that really has an impact. And so I think it's important for all of us to think about creative ways for our children to continue to get some of that social time that they are missing out on. I know everybody is probably Zoom fatigued at this point, no more computer screens, please. That's a real thing too. And I think, more and more we're going to start to have those kind of conversations also. But, does that mean that you spend more time in doing family activities? Do you typically where maybe on a Thursday or Friday, the kids would be doing their activities, basketball, dance, soccer, whatever. Now, are you guys playing Uno and board games in the house just to have that together time, that family time, that social time? As I alluded to, Zoom is becoming played out a little bit, but, aside from them using Zoom and video chat for school, are they also using it in a more social way, also supervised, of course. But are there opportunities for them to have, social time with their friends through the internet? And so we want to make sure that, the kids are still participating in as many social activities as possible to the extent that it's safe. And that may require just a little bit more creative thinking on our part as adults and parents.
So I'm thinking about the husband and wife that, just may have lost their restaurant, or the single mom who now has to work 2 jobs during a pandemic and is not spending that much time at home as much as she'd like to, or the struggling, high school senior that was looking forward to going to college that is dealing with this pandemic. Everybody's going through this, this massive amount of stress. So let's say in a perfect world, you get to the point where you recognize that, stress is starting to become cumbersome on you, and you kind of want to reorient your life in a way that is, less stressful. What's some of the things that you found have been like very good ways to relieve stress, something that that sticks?
Yeah. So I think, one, it's important to think about how much physical activity you're getting. And so having to, a lot of us are working from home, not being able to engage in maybe things that we used to, how much physical exercise are you getting, whether that's taking a walk or doing some exercise in the house. I know gyms are open now to a certain extent. So, people can utilize that now. But I think it's important to pay attention to getting some physical activity at least a few times a week. I would say probably 4 to 5 times a week, especially now that it's getting darker out. Earlier, I think it's really important to get outside when you can. Don't take those grocery store trips for granted,
Get your vitamin D and your
right, absolutely. So I think it's really important to pay attention to that. I think the other thing that's important to pay attention to is daily things like eating habits and sleeping habits. The first thing that usually goes when we are stressed are those three things: eating, sleep, and exercising. Those are the things that get disrupted. And so we want to pay attention to those things the most when we're feeling stressed, because those are the things that help regulate us and give us energy to accomplish the things that we need to during the day. Another thing is, how much time are you spending in reflection, self-reflection? So whether that is journaling or meditation or prayer or something that gets to more of the spiritual or psychological part of you, how much time are you spending with that? Because those things are also really important to cope with stress, to connect to the things that give you hope and connect to the things that, just connecting back to yourself, I would say. And then also 2020, since it was just yes, just throw the whole year away, right? It just, I was saying, what are some things that you can look forward to? And maybe start planning for those things. And so, when we are able to resume normal activities, what are some things that you want to do? And what are some new things that you might want to try? It's interesting. I was talking to a client of mine, and she is going to start taking guitar lessons. Something that she's always wanted to do, and she kept putting it off and putting it off. And she said, "You know what? 2020 took so much from me. I am going to, start my guitar lessons. I'm not gonna put it off anymore." And so I think that's a really good idea to adopt. Maybe what are some of the things that we have put off in our lives that we can not take for granted any longer, and maybe engage in those things starting, with this new year that's upon us.
I love how you spoke about reflection, and I love how you guys do the energy check on your podcast.
Yeah,
that's so cool, man. Like that's the thing. Like if you really just took a minute to do that with yourself every day, like, how do I really feel? Like, instead of just going about my mundane, get up, get dressed, go to work, come home, cook, da 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 da. And it's like, I didn't really take an opportunity to stop and ask myself, how do I feel? That's kind of cool that y'all start the podcast off like that. So the question has got to be, have you ever been at a 10?
Oh, yes.
All right. Okay. I hear a lot of 4s on the show. A lot of 4s and a lot of 5s. A solid 4.
Yep.
That's not a thing, by the way. A solid 4. But yeah. Reflection.
Yeah, important. Yeah, and usually we're always recording when we're in a good space, But yeah, we've definitely, I think all three of us, we've definitely hit those 10s and been in each other's presence when we're at those 10s. And so it's important, because I think a lot of times we get to a place where we are, either going off, the rails, or cussing somebody out, or, just ready to throw the whole day away. And we don't even know how we got here. Right. It's like, where did this come from? Yeah. But there have been signs along the way, but we haven't been paying attention. And I think that's something that we're not really taught to do either. So.
Right. Yes, of course, we alluded to your podcast, Being the World According to Us, and you're joined on that podcast by fellow doctors Nakia Hamlet and Taj Burrows. Tell my listeners a little bit more about why you decided to start to do the podcast, and what do you hope to provide with it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The three of us actually worked together. And after we left that particular job for various different reasons, we stayed in contact, and then we got to the point where we were having these conversations with each other on this app called Marco Polo. I don't know if you know that app, but it's
Never heard of it.
yeah, it's basically just a video messaging app. So we're recording videos of us talking and sending them to each other, and we were always talking about what it was like to be a Black woman in different scenarios. Because typically we would find that we were the only ones, wherever we were, whether that's working in a clinic or, out somewhere or just in a situation where we had to question, like, did that just happen? And so we would get on this app and discuss and find support through each other. And we got to the point where we were like, we can't be the only women experiencing this. And so that's kind of how we decided to start the podcast and talk about these things and then give our perspective just as mental health professionals about how to deal with some of the struggles that we were having personally, which we were pretty sure that other people were probably having as well. So,
yeah, I think it's awesome. I've been enjoying the show so far. I mean, I got a little bit of episodes left so I could binge tomorrow, but it's cool. I really like it, and it's refreshing to hear. But tell my listeners a little bit about where they can find the episodes.
Yes, so we are on SoundCloud, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast, being the podcast. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook, also with that same name, being the podcast. And if anybody ever wanted to reach out and ask questions, we are going to start a segment on the show where we answer questions from listeners. And so if you wanted to reach out and ask us a question, you can find us at the doctors at beingthepodcast.com.
Nice. Well, y'all heard it there. Go download that, all the episodes. Doctor, I appreciate you coming on to Mind On Matters. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for all your input and all the work that you do. And I look forward to talking to you in the future. This has been a great experience.
Yes, same here. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate you for the invitation. This has been great.
So I wanted to close out the episode talking really quickly about what are some of the things we can start doing right now to alleviate some of the negative stress in our life. And Dr. Gaines had alluded to journaling. I'm very new to journaling. I haven't been doing it very long, but I will say that I have seen the benefits of it in a short time frame that I have been doing it for the last couple of months. But if you're anything like me, it can be very hard to sit down in front of an empty notebook or journal and just start writing when you can't really put the thoughts into what you want to say. Well, you can't put the thoughts into words. So I want you guys to check out this app called Jour, Jour. What it is expert guided journaling. So it'll ask you a series of questions about how you feel. Did you have this emotion? How did you react to it? And then based off that, it'll give you a score and then give you guides from experts on how to journal, maybe some breathing exercises. It has more than 100 CBT guides for stress, confidence, sleep, anxiety. And it can start to detect your trends in your mood and then better coach you to have a more happy, healthy lifestyle. The other thing you can do as soon as this podcast is over is take some inventory of your life. Decide what's important, decide what's not. And a lot of times that is who's important and who's not. So if you have a coworker who just seems to be getting on your nerves every day, maybe we limit our contact with him or her, right? Or maybe your job is the source of your stress. It might be time to update your resume and come up with an exit strategy so you can get out of there. Or maybe you could talk to somebody that's in your company or wherever you work about what your concerns are. Maybe that'll alleviate some of your stress. If finances are becoming a problem, maybe we start thinking of creative ways that we can use our God-given talent to come up with a secondary income or tertiary income. Dr. Gaines also alluded to exercise. Getting exercise is super important. If you could do that 3 to 5 times a week, now we're setting ourselves up to alleviate some of that stress, or we're getting some of the stress that we already have out. So we got to change your living room into a makeshift gym 3 or 5 times a week. Do so. Even better, if you can get outside responsibly while social distancing, go out for a nice walk, go out for a nice jog or a run. Some of the gyms are opening up, so that could be a benefit. You're getting some vitamin D from the sun, and we all know that, low levels of vitamin D can contribute to higher levels of stress as well. So exercise, super important. Of course, another critical one is sleep. How much sleep are you getting? It might be time to start turning off your devices, putting it in another room when it's time to go to bed. But you got to be getting those 6 to 8 hours every night. And you will see a difference, trust me. I've only been paying attention to my sleep for maybe the last 3 or 4 years. And I can tell you that it makes a world of a difference when you're getting a good night's sleep as far as how you wake up and approach the world in the morning. So one other thing to pay attention to is the decisions you make while you're under stress. So I've seen situations where somebody might be stressed out or dealing with high levels of stress. And then while they're in that state, they might be like in disarray. So they make a decision, which then creates another stress or another problem. And then now you got to deal with both of these things. We only have so many hands, right? So try to take a second, or when you're feeling out of sorts, to really analyze what the proper move will be. Life is chess, it's not checkers. So don't take a good problem and then make it worse. So that will conclude today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed the content and learned something. I know me doing research for this episode, I definitely learned a lot. I want to take the time again to thank Dr. Latoya Gaines for coming on and granting us that interview. Everything that she said was perfect. Definitely things that we could start to incorporate into our lives and also think about stress a little bit differently than we did before. So I want to thank her again. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. If you did enjoy, please, if you don't mind, subscribe, download, rate the show, share it with a friend, share it on social media. My inbox is open for business. If you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, concerns, advice, topics that you would like to hear me talk about, people that you would like for me to interview, please shoot me a DM or in the comment section of one of the posts. I'm at Mind on Matters on Instagram. And I'll see you guys next episode. Ubuntu.